OPEC is in full control and the world is frightened about further production cuts. Remember, just a month ago, OPEC started to cut their production by 2 million barrels a day. And President Biden, he decided to continue dumping US oil reserves to push down the prices. He announced a further sale of 15 million barrels, which is a drop in the ocean, right? It accounts for 8 days of production cuts from OPEC only. But prices, they have come down. From the start of the production cut to today, we can see crude oil fall from $97 to slightly under $89. But this isn't really because of Biden's grand plan, right? Now, there are two big uncertainties happening. They are keeping a cap on oil prices. The first is the demand from China, which is expected to crash as protests are showing instability in the country. And the second is the looming price cap on Russian oil that's causing a lot of uncertainty. Now, we all know the price cap isn't going to work, but the world still believes that it could, and that is pushing down global prices in the short term. But you quickly see that these two scenarios could quickly reverse, that OPEC holds all the cards, right? They have a royal flush while the US is left with a pair of trees. Now, the problem with selling oil from the SPR to crush oil prices is that it won't work for the long term. And when you are opening a whole can of worms when you're doing that, and especially jeopardizing energy security for the United States, we even have Saudi Arabia's energy minister hinting that the US made a grave mistake by misusing their oil reserves. He went on record saying, "It is my profound duty to make clear to the world that releasing emergency stocks may be painful in the months to come. When you sell off your emergency stocks to try and manipulate the global prices, it is a desperation move that won't move the needle in any meaningful way. It's like trying to pee in the ocean and hoping the water level rises, right? It feels that you're doing something, but it's just a grand waste of time." But the concern here is how eventually you'll need to replenish the oil reserves. And guess what? Biden has given up and they are now looking to stop sales and refill the SPR. We have said many times that the SPR sales won't work and he would eventually U-turn and fill it back up. And when you decide to fill back up the reserves, you're putting additional demand for oil at a time when supply could crash over the next few months. The cuts are now in OPEC's hands and they are in full control of the oil price. So we have to talk about the strategic petroleum reserves first, because it has fallen to an incredible 38-year low. We can see that levels have fallen from a peak of 726 million barrels all the way down to under 390 million barrels. We are now at 1984 levels, which should be very alarming to Americans, and it is a clear signal that the US is losing firepower to influence the oil markets. Now, this is dangerous because the SPR is meant for emergency stocks, and it isn't a long-term strategy to influence the oil price. OPEC will win because they just have that much more room to cut production than the SPR has oil to flood the markets. Remember that the point of the SPR was to ensure America still has oil for its own domestic use if an oil embargo happens. Now, the reserves were created during the 1973 oil shock when Arab producers stopped oil exports to the United States, and it caused the price of oil to go from $3 a barrel to over $11 in just 3 months. Sure, the majority of US oil imports now come from Canada, but America has now lost their Russian supply. And if we look carefully, the US might be a total net exporter of petroleum products, but they are still a net importer of crude oil, bringing in over 3 million barrels of crude a day. So at the current SPR levels, the US only has less than 130 days worth of crude oil in emergency stocks. And this is why we have the Biden administration already announcing the intention to refill the reserves at $70. But I believe that is a mistake. By telling the whole world your price target to refill the reserves, you are telegraphing the punch. You have now sandwiched yourself into a price target that you have to maintain or risk moving the price of oil up. Now just think about it, guys. If Biden decides to raise the price target and sets now $80 as the new target, this will spike the price of oil higher because now there's a big demand for oil, hundreds of millions of barrels worth, and this will set a new floor at $80. But if Biden sticks with $70, OPEC can simply cut production to keep oil prices high enough to prevent the US from replenishing the reserves. And that's why the announcement is a lose-lose move that firmly hands control of the oil markets to the Middle East. Now, OPEC, they are scheduled to meet on December the 4th to discuss the next step in their oil policy. And we need to watch this carefully because there's a chance that they will just slash production again to protect their revenues. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of the Saudis and OPEC because from their perspective, their industry is under fire. Now, the West in general, they have been saying time and time again that green energy is the future and how they're going to cut down on fossil fuels, right? Doesn't matter if it's oil, natural gas, or coal. If it's hydrocarbons, it gotta go, right? And that's a threat to OPEC. Just looking at Saudi Arabia's top exports, the bulk of it is in oil and energy. So if you were them, you want to maintain your revenues while there's still time. You'd want to cut your oil production. This is what Goldman Sachs is predicting. They're expecting a good chance of an OPEC oil cut and oil prices to fly to $110 in 2023. And according to Goldman, there are a few factors that are threatening to push down oil prices in the short term. And the big one is the oil demand that's still heading south in China in the short term. China's PMI that measures factory activity is actually shrinking, it is contracting. And that isn't good for oil demand. The Chinese leadership seems to be softening their stance on the lockdowns after the protests last week, but it's still a coin flip if they will really end the lockdowns by 2023. So OPEC, they're going to factor that into their decision for production cut. Because the longer the shutdown continues, oil revenues are going to continue to drop. Plus, the price cap on Russian oil is coming and it's probably not going to work. Putin can simply refuse to sell oil to the West. We already have China and India buying Russian crude at a 40% discount, meaning Russia's prices are already much lower than any price cap the West is proposing. And that is going to affect OPEC's revenues when Asia is still hooked onto cheap Russian oil and gas. And that's why it's very likely that OPEC is either going to keep the current cuts or slash production even further to push up the global price of oil. We are now seeing a new OPEC, a new Middle East that's looking out for itself, and all that matters is how much money they can make. And we need to realize that OPEC has the firepower to destroy the oil market to keep prices high. If you look back to 2020, they actually cut production by 10 million barrels per day to protect oil prices when the world went into lockdowns. But here's the big risk with further oil cuts because it could create a perfect storm. If China does reopen early and the price cap on Russian oil backfires in a big way, we're going to see oil prices hit Goldman's prediction of $110 and even beyond. Now, this isn't good news for the world because we all know what that means. Higher inflation and central banks all over the world hiking rates until a recession hits. We have Powell coming out to say that smaller rate hikes are coming, and it could be as soon as December this year. So it probably won't be a 75-point hike, maybe just 50 or 25 points. But all that is dependent on inflation levels, which are controlled by energy prices. And we all know this by now, right? If oil prices spike, it is not just prices at the pump that will soar. Your food, your medicine, your products will all rise in price. And the only thing Powell cares about is inflation. And he has mentioned that it will take substantially more evidence to give comfort that inflation is actually declining. By any standard, inflation remains much too high. And let's not misunderstand, more rate hikes are coming and Powell will only slow the pace of the increases if inflation keeps falling. He's not stopping interest rates from going up anytime, guys. But if production cuts happen, now if China reopens and when the price caps on Russian oil backfire, we could see inflation surge back up. Then the Federal Reserve, they have no choice but to be more aggressive and start going for bigger increases. I think the markets right now, they're still too euphoric. It's pricing in a lot of positive hype, and oil prices could bring the stock market back to reality very soon. The S&P is up 3% from just Powell's speech, and that is a premature victory. The problem now is how long and how high will these rates last? Because just imagine 6 to 18 months more of interest rates at like 5 to 6%. Can the economy actually handle this? Remember, we enjoyed over 10 years of near zero rates before, and we are now in a brave new world. We are talking about companies not being able to grow as fast, mortgages getting out of reach for home buyers, and more layoffs happening. There's going to be more money getting sucked out of the system, and this crash probably isn't over yet. But here's the key thing we must remember. The United States has very little firepower left to influence the physical oil markets, right, with the oil reserves. Now, if Biden, he decides to drain the SPR even further, this could put the US in a serious position of facing an oil shock. And let's take a look at the landscape today. This is the most dangerous time to be in the oil markets. We have the big question of the China lockdowns. Winter is coming for Europe, and their economy is going to face an inflation hell. Plus, the price cap on Russian oil is just coming in a few days. This means OPEC is in a perfect position to exert their control of the oil markets. If they cut production, the world, especially the West, is really going to feel the pain. So we have to shift our focus away from Europe and look towards the Middle East, guys, because the new geopolitical front is there. Future economic battles will be fought there. OPEC is now in full control of the world economy. He who controls the energy supply controls the world. So let me know what you think. Will OPEC cut production again? Or will Biden he do the unthinkable and sell even more oil reserves? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these insane times.